How would you react if you were in your hotel room and some of the furniture started to move around? And then you walk out your door to go to leave and you hear a baby crying from the hallway, only to walk out and see absolutely nothing. Well, this is a common experience at the Skirvin Hotel. And while I'm a big fan of ghost hunting and don't really get scared too easily, it is so unsettling to know that so many NBA players will not come back into this hotel again after experiencing paranormal activity. So why is this place so terrifying? Well, the Skirvin Hotel is older than a century. It was built back in 1910 and located in Oklahoma City. The founder of the hotel, William Balzer Skirvin, really wanted a glamorous hotel. It was Prohibition during this time, alcohol was still illegal, and this hotel became a booming speakeasy. On top of this, his daughter Promesta ended up becoming the ambassador to Luxembourg under Harry Truman. So she brought in so much clout. This hotel quickly got a reputation nationally. But this is when Mr. Skirvin decided to have an affair, which created a horror story. Part 2 to the Skirvin Hotel. So W.B. Skirvin is described as a man who really liked to have a good time, he liked to drink, he would also chase women. And somewhere along this, he ended up falling for one of his hotel maids named Effie. And while this man was a widower, you still have to remember that this is the early 1900s. So when the affair started, it was extremely scandalous. And Effie ended up getting pregnant. So Mr. Skirvin is like, oh my gosh, I did not just get a maid pregnant. I need to prevent a scandal. And his answer was to lock her in a room on the 10th floor. So Effie stayed in this room until she got to full term, had her baby, and remained locked away. Slowly, she lost her sanity and grew more and more depressed, and ended up grabbing her infant and throwing herself along with her baby out of the window of the 10th floor. And from this moment on, so many things have been reported around the hotel, including furniture moving around at night, people just feeling an eerie weight on their chest, and because no one could get a decent night's sleep in it, they closed in 1988, but reopened later. Part 3 to the Skirvin Hotel. So the hotel ended up reopening in 2007, and the reports continued of a baby crying in the hallway, and guests in the hotel would walk out and not see anything, and so many men that have stayed there have reported hearing a female voice in their rooms, or also seeing the figure of a naked woman while taking a shower. And it was really blown up whenever basketball players started to stay there when they would play in OKC. Derrick Rose, who grew up in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Chicago, couldn't spend one night in there without making James Johnson share a room with him. Ron Artest actually thought about filing charges against the Skirvin because the ghost was inappropriately touching him. And Kyrie Irving will most likely be making a movie about the hotel. And Eddie Curry was literally on the 10th floor and had to spend the night in Nate Robinson's room because he got so scared. This man is literally like 7 feet. So it really makes me feel like there's something very scary going on. So my best friend and I will be hopping in our car and going down to check out this hotel. We'll be staying the night and vlogging the whole thing for YouTube, so go check it out. Also, go over to her account if you want to hear more about the concept of ghost hunting. Picture this, you spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on a luxury villa in a private island. You are promised to be flown in on a private jet, have top chefs make your food, see some of the best artists in the world. Seemingly on social media, big influencers might be there, such as Hailey Bieber, Kendall Jenner, but instead, what you spent thousands of dollars on was chaos. You are stuck on an island in an abandoned construction site with 5,000 other people, unable to find your luggage, fighting for people over wet mattresses, and unsure of when you're going to be able to go home. Oh yes, and this is your Top Chef food, by the way. This was literally supposed to be the greatest music festival of all time, and instead ended up being one of the biggest scams of all time. So how exactly did we get here? Billy McFarland, who happened to be a young entrepreneur, along with his friend Ja Rule, the rapper, were flying whenever they came across a private island. This island, called Norman's Key, was previously owned by Pablo Escobar, the drug lord. Part 2 to Fire Festival. According to the FBI, Billy had everyone fooled. He wasn't necessarily a serial entrepreneur, he was a serial scammer. And this provided to be his biggest one. After seeing this island, he wanted to host a music festival that was straight out of a dream. Festivals usually take about 12 months to plan. Billy thought that he could put it together in 8 weeks. He started by gathering all the top influencers, Hailey Bieber, Bella Hadid, and put them together for a massive promotional video. He had other big influencers such as Kendall Jenner post an orange tile to their Instagram to give the impression that they were going, even though they weren't and they were paid like $200,000 to post this. This caused a significant amount of hype. It was all over social media. The news was covering it, articles were being written. So whenever tickets came out, it was sold out to 5,000 people immediately. People spending extra for nicer beachfront 8-person villas. While the island's one request to Billy was that he doesn't bring up that it's Pablo Escobar's island. And what does he do within the first promo? Says that this island was previously owned by Pablo Escobar. So he was kicked off that day and had to go somewhere else. Part 3 to Fire Festival. Even though he had to go somewhere else due to all the hype, he was getting in major deals. Major Lazer, Pusha T, Blink-182, and Billy had involved so many investors into this that there was no way that he could back out because he used the money from the investors on the project. He ends up flying around until he finds the island of Great Exuma, which is not a private island. However, on the website, they edit it to make it look like it is. And they find an abandoned development site. No buildings, no villas, yet they still advertise as if there are. They end up finding tents left over from Hurricane Michael and say, yup, this is good enough. So the production team is extremely worried and they're like, hey, we're gonna have to post pictures of what this looks like so people can decide if they want to come or not. Billy responds by just firing them. Somehow he thought people were just going to show up and be okay with this after spending all that money. And to get more money, they implemented cashless wristbands, like asking people who already paid to send them extra money for their wristband. While people are concerned and asking questions on their social media, but they turn off their comments. Soon it was time for people to show up. Part 4 to Fire Festival. Because they weren't really answering people's problems, Blink-182 was the first one to drop out. And then the night before people were supposed to show up, a storm hit, soaking and ruining everything that they had set up previously. Yet for Billy, canceling was still not an option. They oversold and there wasn't even going to be enough beds for staff. While the plane flew in, bringing in all the guests, and to distract them from the actual site, they bussed them over to a restaurant at the end of the island and just fed them alcohol for 6 hours straight. So what they thought was a pre-party was actually just a diversion. Eventually, they were like, we can't just leave them here, we're gonna have to bus them over. So once the people that paid thousands of dollars saw this campsite, you can just imagine the reaction. They were confused, shocked, and didn't have their luggage, but they just kept feeding them alcohol. That night, they finally brought out all the luggage and told people to just go claim it so there was no order. And Billy walked out and said everyone who bought a villa can just pick out a tent. And this is when the chaos began. Hundreds of people broke out, sprinting for a tent. Part 5 to Fire Festival. You can literally see from these photos how chaotic it was. And it didn't take long for social media to find out. This was blasted everywhere the next day, and the most famous thing to come out of it was this cheese sandwich. Their luxury meals. This particular island was also on a very famous holiday for them, so none of the hotels or resorts nearby could take anyone. All of the music acts canceled. And by that day, Billy and Fire Festival was viral. He tried to play it off like this result was out of his control, even though it was completely in his control. He canceled the event, but there wasn't enough planes to fly people back. So people were legitimately stuck there with no food, no water, no air conditioning. Because remember, this was supposed to be a cashless event. And all the locals who helped set up and were never paid started an angry mob. He promised that there would be a 2018 festival, but it never happened. Billy and Ja Rule were sued for $100 million in a class action lawsuit and sentenced to 6 years of prison. He ended up getting in trouble for starting a podcast in jail recently. But if you want to hear that story, go over to my Instagram. It'll be on my middle reels tab. Imagine getting charged for a murder and being sentenced to life without parole, but you didn't commit this murder. In fact, you were wrongly framed for it. And you had not one, not two, but 19 alibi witnesses backing you up, including photo evidence of where you were. However, one man's statement, who was an actual suspect to this crime, but had political power over you, is what put you behind bars. A girl recently reached out to me saying that her uncle had been convicted for a murder that he did not commit. I asked to know more about his case, and both his girlfriend and also 3 Georgetown students who have been working extensively on his case sent me so many documents backing up this man's innocence. This is the Melvin Ortiz case. On December 23rd of 1997, 2 masked gunmen entered Effie's Pizza Villa, which is located in Reading, Pennsylvania. The owner, George Clauser, was cleaning as they walked in. The 2 assailants told everybody to get down, and George was shot in the back. He was then directed by one of the gunmen to open up the cash register, but he obviously couldn't after being shot, so the gunman fled the scene and George was soon pronounced dead. Part 2 to the Melvin Ortiz case. So a similar robbery had occurred at this same pizza villa 2 weeks prior. The police had absolutely no leads, but they were hoping an eyewitness would point them in the right direction. The police came to this crime scene and stayed for maybe an hour, and they found no physical evidence, no fingerprints, but a bullet casing was found hours later by an employee while cleaning, which is sloppy work on their part. They had no leads, nothing, but one of the police officers had a close relationship with the victim, so he was desperate to find someone. A $10,000 reward was released, and that's when people started calling. All legitimate leads were tossed away, except for one man's, John Caltagirone. He was the son of a former Pennsylvania state representative who had an extensive criminal record history, but never really got in trouble due to the Caltagirone's political power. Even though he barely knew Melvin, he said that Melvin had confessed to him. So where was Melvin during the murder? Well, George was murdered at 7:30 p.m., but from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., Melvin was at a toddler's birthday party, 20 minutes away from the crime scene. Part 3 to the Melvin Ortiz case. So during the time the crime was committed, Melvin was at a birthday party for a toddler 20 minutes away with 19 alibi witnesses there, along with actual photos to prove it. Melvin was 17 years old. He had recently signed up for a program at Job Corps in Pennsylvania to be taught different trades and skills so that he could be certified and get a job. He wanted to get his life on track and make his parents proud. But he came back that December in 1997 to spend Christmas with his family, and he says it's one of his biggest regrets. A day after being set up, he decided that he was going to just turn himself in. He was very confident because he had such a solid alibi. He thought it was a misunderstanding, it would all get sorted out. But after going in that day to prove his innocence, he hasn't come out since. And he has been in prison for 23 years. The second gunman was never sought after, found, or convicted. So what happened during the trial? Well, Detective Grau was the lead detective who had a reputation for playing dirty, and he ended up coercing 2 witnesses to come forward. The first person he threatened was Tina and told her if she didn't come forward, he would put her in the foster care system. Part 4 to the Melvin Ortiz case, the trial. So a little backstory on Tina, she was actually dating John Caltagirone. She was 15 at the time, he was her older boyfriend. At trial, she stated that she overheard Melvin confess to John. The other girl that was threatened by the detective was named Cynthia Jacks. The detective had threatened to take her kid away. And the third witness was a 30-year-old jailhouse snitch with a record of providing false accounts to the police. Only 4 of the alibi witnesses were allowed to testify. The other 15 were just acquaintances and had no reason to lie for him. And they had already told police that Melvin was at the party. But in the end, he was declared guilty. Well, in 2018, Tina took back her whole testimony. Not only did she take back her statement, but she also implicated herself in the crime. The night of the murder, John drove her to her house whenever he was supposed to be at work. And they lived a block from Effie's. He made her pick up a bag behind her couch that contained a hoodie, a mask, and a gun, and then told her to throw this bag into the river. Tina was 15 and pregnant at the time. John had pressured her to say that it was Melvin. Part 5 to the Melvin Ortiz case. So what about Cynthia Jacks? Well, John had promised her $10,000 to run away to Mexico and said to her that he had made up Melvin's involvement. She was murdered about 20 years ago, so it's her word against John's at this point. But I also want to point out that at the trial, John's criminal history was never brought up. Pretty much all of his charges were dismissed due to his father's political clout. Not to mention that his father was buddy-buddies with several of the judges on Melvin's case. To add this additional part, on September 23rd of 1997, 3 months before the Effie's incident, a man called the police saying that there were 3 masked men outside of a brown Ford Bronco registered to John Caltagirone. And this vehicle was not stolen. Not to mention, John's own niece is on TikTok. She also states that Melvin needs to be free, and that both her grandfather and her uncle need to be held accountable. I also forgot to bring up that the one eyewitness that was at Effie's that night during the murder testified stating that Melvin was not either of the gunmen. So, who was the other gunman that night? Part 6 to the Melvin Ortiz case. So the second gunman had never been found, and after the trial, a man named Gary went to the Ortiz home, and he came forward with information about his brother. Jesus Colon Lopez had confessed to him that he had killed George. He also went by Junior. He had meant to tell the police that so Melvin would be set free, but after an 11-hour standoff with the police, he took his own life before he could do that. And the only other person that knows information about this is Junior's sister, and she refuses to speak. And the Ford Bronco that was reported in the last part was outside of Junior's house. Tina taking back her statement was denied as evidence. She believes that this is still due to the power of John's father. Melvin has tried to petition for post-conviction collateral relief 6 times. Every time he has been denied. The Free Melvin Ortiz team is tagged below. His website along with his petition is on my link tree. You can also go check out my Instagram. I'm going to have a lot more information on there as well. And I will have a YouTube together for you guys soon. Not only has the justice system deprived a family of knowing who their true killer was, but they wrongfully put a man behind bars in the process.